Elena Rossi was about to find out. When she stood up to her vile manager to protect a quiet, shy girl, she had no idea the girl's father was watching. She had no idea he was Alessandro Falcone, the most feared man in the city. And she had no idea that her one act of kindness was about to ignite a Mafia war and change her life forever. The clatter of plates was the soundtrack to Elena Rossi's exhaustion. At 26, her life was a repeating loop of sore feet, stained aprons, and the acrid smell of burnt coffee. She worked the lunch and dinner rush at Cafe Milano, a restaurant that pretended to be high class, but whose gold-plated fixtures were peeling to reveal cheap plastic underneath. Elena wasn't just tired, she was desperate. Every dollar from her tips that were dwindling thanks to the restaurant's failing reputation, went into a shrinking fund for her younger sister, Clara. Clara, who was 18 and had a smile that could light up a room, was currently in a hospital bed, fighting a rare autoimmune disorder that the doctors at the public clinic were struggling to even diagnose, let alone treat. The biggest stain on the Cafe Milano, however, wasn't on the silverware. It was Arthur Vance. Vance was the manager. A man of medium height and zero charisma, he wielded his tiny shred of power like a tyrant king. He had oily, thinning hair, a perpetually sneering upper lip, and a habit of accidentally brushing against the waitstaff. He particularly loathed Elena. He couldn't stand her quiet dignity, the way she refused to laugh at his crude jokes, the way she simply endured him. "Rossi!" he barked from across the dining room, his voice slicing through the midday hum. Elena, balancing 3 heavy plates on her forearm, didn't flinch. "Yes, Mr. Vance?" "Table 7 is complaining. Their risotto is cold. Again. Is it that hard to walk from the kitchen to the table before the food congeals?" "I brought it out the moment it was ready, sir," Elena said, her voice a monotone of practiced patience. "Don't talk back to me," Vance hissed, stepping into her personal space. He smelled like stale cigarettes and cheap cologne. "Maybe if you spent less time daydreaming and more time hustling, you'd actually earn your tips. Or are you just incompetent?" Eleanor set the plates down on her next table, forcing a smile for the customers. "My apologies, Mr. Vance. I'll get them a fresh one." "You do that," he smirked. "And it's coming out of your pay, understand? We don't reward incompetence here." Elena's stomach clenched. That was $35 she couldn't afford to lose. That was a copay for Clara's medication. She bit her tongue so hard she tasted copper. "Yes, sir." She retreated to the kitchen, her hands shaking, not from fear, but from a deep, simmering rage she had to swallow every single day. The other waitstaff averted their eyes. Everyone knew the rules. Keep your head down, let Vance have his power trip, and pray you weren't his target for the day. Elena was always his target. She grabbed the fresh risotto, her mind already calculating. If she skipped dinner for the next 3 nights, she could make up the loss. She'd done it before. As she re-entered the dining room, the bell above the door chimed. 2 new customers walked in. The first was a man in his late 30s, tall and built like a statue. He wore a simple, dark grey Henley that did nothing to hide the broad, powerful muscles of his chest and arms. His face was all sharp angles, with a strong jaw and dark, piercing eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He wasn't smiling. Holding his hand was a young girl, about 10 years old, with the same dark eyes and a cascade of black, wavy hair. She clung to his hand, looking at the floor, a picture of shy vulnerability. Vance, seeing them, scoffed audibly. They weren't wearing designer labels. The man's clothes were expensive, but in a quiet, understated way that Vance's unrefined eye mistook for cheap. "Just 2, Vance snapped, not even looking up from his podium. The man's eyes narrowed. "Yes, His voice was a low, gravelly rumble. "Fine, Rossi," Vance yelled, gesturing. "You've got another one. Table 9. He tossed 2 menus onto the table in the darkest, coldest corner of the restaurant, right by the drafty kitchen door. Elena winced. It was the worst table in the house, but she put on her professional smile and walked over. "Good afternoon. My name is Elena, and I'll be your server. Can I start you with some drinks?" The man looked at her, his gaze so intense it felt like a physical weight. He wasn't looking at her the way Vance did, not with that leering hunger. He was assessing, taking her measure. "Just water for me," he said. He looked at his daughter. "Bella, what do you want?" The girl, Bella, whispered something. "She'll have an apple juice," the man said. "Of course," Eleanor said, giving the girl a small, warm smile. Bella looked up, surprised, and offered a tiny, hesitant smile back before hiding her face in her father's arm again. Elena felt a pang in her chest. The girl reminded her so much of Clara. Elena kept a professional distance, but she watched them. The man, Sandro, she heard the girl call him, was patient and gentle with his daughter. He cut her pasta into smaller bites. He listened intently as she whispered to him, his imposing figure hunched over to hear her better. It was a pocket of quiet tenderness in the loud, obnoxious dining room. Vance, meanwhile, was on a warpath. He had been reprimanded by the owner over the phone, and he was taking it out on everyone. He'd already made one of the new bus boys cry. The incident happened over a glass of water. Bella, reaching for a piece of bread, knocked over her small glass of water. It wasn't a big spill. It was a small puddle on the tablecloth. The girl froze, her eyes wide with panic, staring at the spreading stain. "Oh, honey, it's okay," Elena said, already moving forward with a fresh napkin. "It's just water. We'll have it cleaned up in a second." "What is wrong with you?" Elena looked up. Vance was storming over, his face a mottled, angry red. He wasn't looking at Elena. He was glaring at Bella. "I am sick of this," Vance shouted, pointing a quivering finger at the child. "This is an expensive, custom-made tablecloth. Do you have any idea how much this costs to launder? You clumsy little—" Sandro, the father, had gone rigid. His hands were flat on the table, and his dark eyes had turned to black ice. He hadn't said a word, but the temperature around the table had dropped 20 degrees. He was a lion, coiled and ready to strike. But it was Eleanor who spoke first. "Mr. Vance, that is enough." Vance stopped, mid-rant, and turned to her. "What did you just say to me?" "I said, 'That is enough,'" Elena repeated, her voice low and trembling, but firm. She physically stepped between Vance and the table, shielding Bella from his view. "It was an accident. She's a child. You are making a scene." The entire restaurant went silent. The clink of silverware stopped. Everyone was watching. Vance's eyes bulged. This was public. This was insubordination. You little—" He was sputtering, enraged. "You think you can talk to me like that? You're screaming at a 10-year-old girl for spilling water," Elena said, her own anger, all the pent-up frustration from months of abuse, finally boiling over. "It's unprofessional, it's cruel, and I won't be a part of it. The spill is on my table, and I will clean it. You need to walk away. Now." For a second, Vance was stunned into silence by her audacity. Then, his face twisted into a mask of pure spite. "You're fired." The words hung in the air, cold and final. "You're fired, Rossi!" Vance shrieked, his voice cracking. "You hear me? Get your cheap, worn-out shoes, get your things from your locker, and get out of my restaurant. You are finished." Elena's blood ran cold. Clara, the hospital bills, the medicine. She had just thrown away her sister's lifeline. The adrenaline vanished, replaced by a cold, hollowing dread. She could feel the tears welling up, but she refused to let him see her cry. She nodded once, her throat too tight to speak. She turned, unclipped her apron, and laid it on a nearby service station. She didn't look at the man. She couldn't. She had defended his daughter, and it had cost her everything. As she walked towards the door, a deep voice cut through the silence. "She's not going anywhere." Elena froze. She turned. The quiet man, Sandro, was standing. He was taller than she'd realized, a truly imposing figure. All the quiet gentleness was gone, replaced by an aura of absolute, terrifying authority. "Excuse me?" Vance said, trying to sound brave. "I said," the man repeated, taking a step forward, "she's not going anywhere. But you are." "You have no right," Vance began. "You," the man said, pointing at Vance, his voice dropping to a predatory growl, "just humiliated my daughter." "And you?" he said, his gaze shifting to Eleanor, his eyes softening for a fraction of a second. "Just showed more character than anyone in this entire building. My daughter and I are finished here." He dropped a black $100 bill onto the table, far more than enough for the pasta and juice. He took Bella's hand. He walked towards the door where Elena was standing, paralyzed. He stopped in front of her. She had to crane her neck to look up at him. He was close enough that she could smell him. A faint, clean scent of expensive soap and something metallic, like iron. "You were right," he said, his voice for her alone. He was wrong. He reached into the pocket of his jeans and pulled out a small, incredibly heavy-looking business card. It was matte black, with no gloss. The lettering was embossed in a simple, severe silver font. It just had a name and a number. Alessandro Falcone, a phone number. He pressed it into her hand. Her fingers closed around the thick cardstock. "I'll be in touch," he said. It wasn't a question or a promise. It was a statement of fact. And then he and his daughter were gone. Elena was left standing in the silent restaurant, holding the card, with Arthur Vance's murderous gaze boring into her back. The silence in the restaurant lasted for 10 seconds, and then Vance exploded. "Get out!" he screamed, his face purple. "You are trespassing. If you're not gone in 30 seconds, I'm calling the police." Elena didn't need to be told twice. She fled, grabbing her thin coat and her purse from the locker room, not even bothering to change out of her uniform. She burst out onto the busy street, the afternoon sunlight blinding. She was shaking so violently she had to lean against the brick wall of the alley. Fired! 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 The word echoed in her head. She had no job, no income, no way to pay for Clara's next treatment. She had acted on impulse, on a fierce, protective instinct, and it had ruined her. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the grimy pavement, and for the first time that day, she let the tears come. After 10 minutes of gut-wrenching sobs, the chill of the concrete seeped into her, and her survival instinct kicked in. Crying wouldn't solve anything. She got up, wiped her face, and started the long walk home. She couldn't afford the bus fare now. In her hand, she still clenched the black business card. Alessandro Falcone. The name tugged at her memory. It wasn't just a name. It was a brand. She'd seen it on high-end construction sites. Falcone Development. She'd heard whispers of it on the local news, always connected to shipping, logistics, and real estate. The news anchors always used words like reclusive, powerful, and influential. But there was another word, the one they never said on TV, the one people whispered in bars and bodegas, Mafia. Elena's blood turned to ice. She'd heard the rumors. The Falcone family didn't just own the city, they ran it. They were the shadows that moved behind the politicians, the invisible hand that controlled the unions, the unseen force that made problems disappear. She looked at the card again. This wasn't a job offer. This was a summons. She got home to her tiny one-bedroom apartment. The check engine light in her life was permanently on. She microwaved a cup of ramen and stared at the card. What did he mean? I'll be in touch. How? He didn't have her number. The card had his number. She was being stupid. He was a rich, powerful man. He was grateful she'd defended his daughter. Maybe he intended to send her a check, a thank you for her trouble. He was probably just a normal, rich developer. And the Mafia stuff was just a racist, anti-Italian rumor. She needed to be proactive. She couldn't wait for him. She had to find a new job. She spent the next 2 hours scrolling through job sites, her heart sinking with every bachelor's degree required and 5+ years experience. Her phone rang, a no-caller ID. She ignored it. It rang again. She ignored it. On the third ring, it went to voicemail. A minute later, her phone buzz-ED with a text from an unknown number. Ms. Rossi, this is Alessandro Falcone. You have my card. Call the number. Now. It wasn't a request. It was an order. Her hands were trembling so hard she could barely unlock her phone. She stared at the text. He had her number. How? He had her name. Ms. Rossi. Vance had only ever called her Rossi. Had this man, this Falcone, learned her full name and cell phone number in the 30 minutes since he'd left the restaurant? A new kind of fear, cold and sharp, replaced her desperation. This was not a normal man. She took a deep breath, steadied her hand, and dialed the number from the black card. It rang once, a sharp, clean click. Bianchi! The voice was gruff, deep, and sounded like it belonged to a man who hadn't smiled since 1993. Hello? Elena stammered. My name is Elena Rossi. I was given this number by Mr. Falcone. A pause. We are aware. A car is on its way to your location. It will be there in 10 minutes. Be outside. My location? Wait, how do you... 10 minutes, Miss Rossi. The line went dead. Elena scrambled to the window. Her apartment overlooked a run-down street. There was no way. Exactly 10 minutes later, a gleaming black sedan, a car so expensive and polished it looked like a block of liquid darkness, pulled up to her curb. The windows were tinted so black they looked like mirrors. A man got out of the driver's seat. He was built like a refrigerator, wearing a black suit that looked like it cost more than her entire apartment. He looked up, his eyes scanning the windows, and they landed, locked, right on hers. He nodded, once. Elena's heart was hammering against her ribs. This was insane. This was a kidnapping. She shouldn't go. She should call the police. And tell them what? That a rich man was sending a car for her after she got fired? They'd laugh. Clara. This man, Falcone, was powerful. He had to be. Maybe he was going to offer her a job. A real job. One that could pay for Clara's specialists. What choice did she have? To go back to begging for minimum wage from another pig like Vance? She grabbed her coat, ran a brush through her hair, and walked out of her apartment building, leaving her old life behind. The man in the black suit, he had introduced himself only as Marcus, didn't speak a word during the entire drive. The silence in the car was heavy, oppressive, broken only by the whisper of the tires on the asphalt. Elena watched her run-down neighborhood of cracked pavement and chain-link fences dissolve into the polished, glass and steel heart of downtown. They didn't stop at an office building. They pulled into a private underground garage beneath the most exclusive address in the city, the Falcone Tower. The name, which she'd barely registered before, now seemed to mock her. Marcus led her to a private elevator. He used a key card, then pressed his thumb to a biometric scanner. The elevator shot upwards, silent and impossibly fast. There were no buttons for other floors. The doors opened not into a hallway, but directly into a penthouse apartment that was larger than her entire apartment building. The front wall was a solid sheet of glass, 2 stories high, overlooking the entire city. The furniture was minimal, expensive, and looked like it had never been sat on. The floors were a cold, white marble. It was less a home, more a statement of power. "He's in his study." Marcus's voice startled her. He gestured down a long, dark hallway. "Wait here." Elena stood awkwardly in the massive, empty room, feeling small and out of place in her server's uniform. The black pants and white shirt that were now a symbol of her failure. She heard muffled voices from the hallway. One was the deep rumble of Alessandro Falcone. The other was a high, angry voice she didn't recognize. "Unacceptable, Alessandro. You put her in danger. You put us in danger by being so public." "It's handled, Franco." "Handled? You call buying a restaurant handled? You call promoting a dishwasher? That's enough." Falcone's voice cut through the other, sharp as a razor. "The meeting is over." A moment later, a slick, impeccably dressed man in a silk suit stormed out of the hallway, his face red. He shot Elena a look of pure venom, as if she were a bug he'd found on his shoe, and then stormed out of the penthouse, slamming the door. "Elena Rossi." She jumped. Alessandro Falcone was standing in the mouth of the hallway. He had changed out of the Henley and into a crisp white shirt and black trousers. He looked every inch the billionaire developer. But his eyes were the same, cold, assessing, and ancient. "Mr. Falcone," she said, her voice a small squeak. "Please, call me Sandro." He didn't smile. "Come in. Sit." He led her to his study. It was the opposite of the cold living room. It was warm, lined with dark wood shelves filled with books, not just decorative ones, but old, cracked leather-bound books. A fireplace crackled in the corner, and sitting in a large armchair by the fire, reading a book, was Bella. The girl looked up when Eleanor entered. A huge, brilliant smile broke out on her face. "It's you, the lady from the restaurant." She jumped up and ran to Eleanor, hugging her around the legs. "Thank you for being mean to Mr. Vance. He was a bad man." Eleanor, completely disarmed, instinctively put her hand on the girl's head. "You're welcome, sweetie. But I wasn't mean. I was firm." Sandro watched this interaction with an unreadable expression. "Bella, why don't you go with Marcus? He has that new video game you wanted." "Okay," Bella chirped. She hugged Elena again. "Are you staying?" "We're just talking, Tesoro," Sandro said. "Go." Bella skipped out of the room. Her entire demeanor changed from the shy, fearful child in the restaurant. Here, in her home, she was safe. The moment the door clicked shut, the warmth in the room seemed to vanish. Sandro sat behind a massive desk made of a single slab of dark wood. He gestured for Eleanor to sit. "Bella has problems," he said, steepling his fingers. "She has severe social anxiety. She's mostly non-verbal with strangers. Her mother passed away 3 years ago, and she hasn't been the same since. I have specialists. I have therapists. None of it works. She's terrified of the world." He leaned forward. "But she's not terrified of you. What you did today, that was the first time she's smiled in public in months. She hasn't stopped talking about the brave lady since we left." Elena didn't know what to say. "She's a sweet girl." "She is," he agreed. "And you are out of a job because of her." Yes. I have a proposition for you, Miss Rossi. Elena, I'd like you to work for me. For Bella. Work for you? Doing what? Her governess, her companion, her friend. I don't know the title, but I want you to be for her what you were today. A protector. Someone who isn't afraid. Someone who will stand up for her. He named a salary. Elena's jaw nearly hit the floor. It wasn't a salary, it was a fortune. It was more money than she would make in 20 years at the Milano. It was enough to get Clara the best doctors in the world. She stammered. Mr. Falcone. Sandro, I don't have any qualifications. I'm not a teacher. I'm a waitress. I don't need a teacher. I have a dozen of those, he said dismissively. I need someone with integrity. I need someone brave. I saw your file, Elena. You're supporting your sister, Clara. She's at St. Jude's Public. Her case is complicated. He knew about Clara. He knew the hospital. He had a file on her. The room, which had seemed so warm, now felt like a very elegant cage. As part of your employment, he continued, as if reading her mind, Clara will be moved to the Avellino private clinic tonight. She will be seen by Dr. Isabel Reed, the foremost specialist in her field. All expenses will be covered. This was the deal. He was offering her sister's life in exchange for her own. Why? Elena whispered, the question escaping her before she could stop it. Why all this? For a waitress who stood up to a bully? Sandro stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city that was his. Because, Elena, in my world, there is no one who is not on my payroll. Everyone who smiles at me, everyone who bows to me, does so because they are paid or because they are afraid. Or both. Today, at that restaurant, you had no idea who I was. You had nothing to gain. You defended my daughter and expected nothing in return. You risked everything you had for her. He turned, and his dark eyes were blazing with a raw intensity. That, he said, his voice a low growl, is the single most valuable commodity in the world. It's called loyalty, and I will pay any price to have it near my daughter. Elena looked at the man who was offering her a golden cage. He was a monster, she was sure of it. A rich, powerful and dangerous monster. But he was also offering her the one thing she couldn't say no to. Hope. I accept, she said. The next 24 hours were a blur. Elena was moved into the Falcone Tower. Her room was a full suite on the floor below the main penthouse, connected by a private staircase. It was 3 times the size of her old apartment, with its own kitchen, a walk-in closet, and a bathroom made of a frightening amount of marble. True to his word, Sandro's machine moved with terrifying efficiency. A private ambulance, staffed by a team of calm, professional specialists, transferred Clara to the Avellino clinic. Elena was there to sign the papers, her hand shaking. Dr. Reed, a woman with kind eyes and a steel-trap mind, met them personally. We're going to start a new treatment regimen immediately, Dr. Reed had told her after reviewing Clara's file. This is very manageable, Miss Rossi. Your sister is going to be fine. Eleanor had wept in the hallway, a deep, shuddering sob of relief that she had been holding in for 2 years. Her new life was simple, on the surface. She woke up, had breakfast with Bella, who was now a chatty, bright and incredibly smart little girl, and accompanied her to her lessons with private tutors. They spent afternoons in the penthouse's private library, or the indoor pool, or the rooftop garden. Elena's only job was to be Bella's friend, and it was easy. Bella was a wonderful kid, starved for genuine affection and a normal, playful presence. But around the edges of this idyllic life, the bars of the cage were always visible. She was never, ever alone. Marcus, the silent, hulking driver, was a permanent fixture. He was Bella's bodyguard, and by extension, Elena's. If they went to the park, a private, walled-in park that Sandro owned, Marcus was there, watching from a bench. Sandro himself was a ghost for the first few days, leaving before she and Bella woke up, returning long after Bella was in bed. Elena only saw him in passing, a dark-suited wraith moving through the cold marble halls. But she felt his presence everywhere. The food in the kitchen was her favorite. A new wardrobe had appeared in her closet, filled with clothes in her exact size, tasteful, expensive, and nothing like her own style. He was watching. He was learning. One evening, she was in the library, reading a novel, unable to sleep. "You should be resting," she yelped, dropping the book. Sandro was leaning against the doorway, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He wasn't wearing a suit, but a simple black cashmere sweater and trousers. He looked human. "Sandro," she breathed, her heart rabbiting. "You scared me. My apologies." He walked into the room, his presence filling the space. "How is Clara?" "She's better," Elena said, her voice thick with emotion. "Dr. Reed called. The new treatment, it's working. They think she'll be able to come home in a few months." "That's good news," he said, his voice flat. He took a sip of his drink. I can't ever. Thank you isn't enough, Sandro." "I wasn't looking for thanks," he said, sitting in the armchair opposite her. "I was fulfilling my end of our arrangement." An awkward silence fell. Elena, for the first time, felt bold enough to ask, "What happened to Mr. Vance?" Sandro's eyes met hers over the rim of his glass. There was no emotion in them. "Why do you ask?" I've just been worried. He's a terrible man, but you didn't hurt him, did you?" A slow, cold smile touched Sandro's lips. It didn't reach his eyes. "Hurt him?" "No, Ms. Rossi, I'm not a brute." He leaned forward, as if sharing a secret. Arthur Vance was a man who lived to bully those he perceived as beneath him. He fed on that small, pathetic power. To fire him would be a mercy. To hurt him physically would be a mess. "So what did you do?" Elena asked, almost afraid of the answer. "I bought the Cafe Milano," Sandro said simply, as if discussing the weather. "The holding company I used finalized the purchase yesterday morning. The previous owner was eager to sell, once his significant gambling debts were brought to his attention." Elena's mouth went dry. "And then," Sandro continued, "I went to the restaurant this morning. Mr. Vance was, as you can imagine, quite surprised to see me. He was even more surprised when I introduced myself as his new boss." "You fired him," Elena said, relieved. "Fire him?" Sandro laughed, a short, humorless bark. "No, I promoted him." Elena frowned. "Promoted?" "Oh yes. I promoted him to head of sanitation and waste management at my new acquisition." Sandro took another sip. "He's the head dishwasher at the Serpent's Tooth." Elena gasped. The Serpent's Tooth was not a nice place. It was a rough, dockside bar, and nightclub rumored to be the Falcone family's unofficial headquarters for their less savory business. It was a place where police didn't go. "He'll be working the 2 a.m. to 10 a.m. shift," Sandro said, a note of grim satisfaction in his voice. "He'll be scrubbing the pots for my employees. He'll be taking out the trash. And I've instructed his new shift manager, a man I trust implicitly, that Mr. Vance is not to be fired, no matter what." Sandro smiled, and this time it was a real, terrifying smile. "I took away his power, Elena. I gave him a uniform, a scrub brush, and a boss who knows exactly what he is. I buried him in a place where his screaming won't be heard. A fate, I think you'll agree, far worse than simply being fired." Eleanor stared at him, horrified, and, to her shame, deeply impressed. It was a cruel, brilliant, and poetic form of justice. This was the man she worked for. A man who didn't use a cudgel when he could use a scalpel. I see, she managed to say. Good. He stood up. The moment was over. Get some sleep, Elena. You and Bella are going to the zoo tomorrow. Marcus has the itinerary. He left her alone in the library, her mind reeling. He was a monster. But he was her monster. And he had just shown her exactly what he was capable of. Life settled into a strange, new normal. Elena and Bella's bond grew stronger every day. Elena taught her how to bake cookies in the huge, stainless steel kitchen. Bella, in return, taught Elena the basics of chess, a game she played with a ruthless, strategic mind that was all her father's. Elena's fear of Sandro slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to morph into something else. Fascination. She saw the side of him no one else did, the way his whole face softened when Bella ran to hug him, the way he'd listen, truly listen, to Elena's reports about Bella's day, asking detailed questions about her progress. He started coming home for dinner. At first it was stiff and formal, but Bella acted as a buffer, and soon Elena found herself relaxing. She and Sandro would talk about books, about history, about the city. He was fiercely intelligent, well-read, and, she discovered, surprisingly witty in a dry, dark way. He never talked about his business. That was the one unspoken rule. The shipping, the real estate, the other. It was a closed door, but the romance, the dangerous, unspoken pull, was undeniable. It was in the way he'd watch her when she was playing with Bella. It was in the way his hand would brush hers, a jolt of electricity, as he passed her a glass of wine at dinner. It was in the way his eyes had stopped being cold and assessing, and were now hungry. Elena was terrified of it. She was an employee. She was a glorified nanny. This man was a don, a boss, a killer. He had to be. And she, Elena Rossi, the broke waitress, was falling for him. The first real crack appeared on a Thursday. Sandro was hosting a business dinner. Elena and Bella were to remain in their suite. From her window, Elena watched them arrive, a motorcade of black cars, filled with men in dark suits, their faces hard and unsmiling. The man from the hallway, Franco, was among them. He looked up at her window, and his eyes narrowed in recognition and contempt. Hours later, long after Bella was asleep, Elena crept up to the penthouse kitchen for a glass of water. She heard them, shouting. The meeting was not going well. The Vitale family is making a move on the docks, Sandro, and you're sitting up here playing house. It was Franco's voice. The Vitale family are dogs. They're disorganized. Sandro's voice rumbled back, calm and cold. They're our dogs, and they've broken their leash. They're sniffing around your new pet. A beat of silence. What did you just say? Sandro's voice was so cold it burned. Don't be a fool, Alessandro. You bring this waitress into your home. You parade her around with your daughter. You put a target on her. You put a target on Bella. The Vitales see her. They see a weakness, a new one. Elena is not a weakness, Sandro growled. She's an employee, and you are out of line, cousin. Am I? Franco's voice was mocking. We'll see. A boss who thinks with his heart, or other parts, isn't a boss for long. The old men, they're watching you, Sandro. They don't like this. It's sloppy. Elena backed away, her heart hammering. Pet, weakness, target. She fled back to her room, the illusion of her safe, golden cage shattering around her. She wasn't just an employee. She wasn't a potential love interest. In this world, she was a liability, a piece on a chessboard, and by being close to Sandro, she had just painted a target on her own back and on Bella's. The next day, she tried to resign. She found Sandro in his study, a map of the city's shipping lanes spread across his desk. "Sandro, I need to talk to you," she said, her hands shaking. "Of course," he said, not looking up. I think Bella is much better, and Clara is... She's going to be released soon. I think it's time for me to go." Now he looked up. The room went silent. The air crackled with a sudden, dangerous energy. "Go?" he repeated, his voice dangerously soft. "Yes, I can't. I'm not qualified for this," she stammered, a half-truth. "I need to get my own apartment, get Clara settled." He stood up and walked around the desk. He stopped in front of her, so close she had to tilt her head back. "You're lying," he said. "It wasn't an accusation. It was a fact. No, You're scared. You overheard Franco last night." Elena's blood ran cold. I don't know what you're talking about." "Stop," he commanded, his voice gentle but firm. He reached up, his hand hovering, and tucked a stray piece of hair behind her ear. His fingers were warm against her skin, and she shivered. "You don't think I had this entire penthouse swept for listening devices? I knew you were there, Elena, just as I knew Franco was posturing for the men downstairs." He looked at her, and all pretense was gone. His eyes were dark with an emotion she couldn't name. Possession. "You want to know if you're a weakness?" he whispered. "Yes, you are. You and Bella. You are the only two weaknesses I have left in this world." "Sandra, please," she begged, terrified of what he was saying, and even more terrified of how it made her feel. "You think I'm going to let you go? Let you walk out that door?" He laughed, a dark, low sound. "After you just told me you're my weakness? That's not how my world works. I don't get rid of my weaknesses, Eleanor. I protect them. I'm not yours to protect," she said, her voice small. His hand moved from her hair to her jaw, his thumb gently stroking her cheek. "You have been," he said, his voice a possessive growl, "since the moment you stood up to that fat, pathetic coward in the restaurant. You were mine then. You just didn't know it." He leaned in, his lips just centimeters from hers. She could feel his breath. She should run. She should scream, but she didn't. "You are not leaving," he said. "Not now. Not ever. The Vitale family, my cousin, the old men, they are my problem. Your only problem is what to do with Bella this afternoon." He was close to kissing her, to sealing the deal, when his phone buzzed. He pulled back, the spell broken. He looked at the screen. The softness, if it could be called that, was gone. His face was a mask of stone. "Marcus!" he snapped into the phone. "What?" A pause. Sandro's entire body tensed. "Where?" Another pause. "I'm on my way," he said. "Lock down the tower, and she doesn't leave your sight. Do you understand me?" He hung up. "What is it?" Elena asked, her heart pounding. "That was a test, Elena," Sandro said, grabbing his suit jacket. His eyes were black. "A test?" "The Vitales. They didn't come after you. They went after something easier. They just firebombed the Cafe Milano." "What? Is anyone hurt?" "I don't care," he said, his voice a blade. "They didn't hit the serpent's tooth. They hit the place where you used to work, the place where I met you. It wasn't an attack on my business. It was a message, to me, about you. The firebombing of the Cafe Milano changed everything. The message was clear. We know what you care about. We can touch it." Sandro became a phantom of steel and rage. He was on the phone constantly, his voice a low, commanding growl, speaking in rapid-fire Italian. The number of stone-faced men in dark suits who came and went from the penthouse tripled. The tower was on lockdown. Elena and Bella were confined to the penthouse, but it no longer felt like a home. It felt like a fortress under siege. "Why is Papa so angry?" Bella asked, pushing her untouched food around her plate. "He's just busy with work, sweetie," Elena lied, her own stomach in knots. The romance, the fragile, dangerous thing that had been building between them, was frozen, encased in the ice of Sandro's cold fury. He barely looked at her. When he did, his eyes were distant, calculating. She wasn't Elena to him right now. She was a strategic problem, a target. Franco, his cousin, was a constant, sneering presence. He'd watch Elena with open contempt. "See what you've done?" his eyes said. "You've brought a war to our door." After 3 days of this, Elena couldn't take it anymore. She found Franco alone, waiting for the private elevator. "This is my fault, isn't it?" she said, her voice stronger than she felt. Franco turned, a cruel smile on his slick face. "The little waitress speaks. Yes, Cara, it is. You're a distraction. You made him soft. And now, the Vitales are bleeding us on the docks, and all because our capo is busy protecting his new toy." "I'm not a toy," Elena said, her hands clenching. "Oh, no." Franco stepped closer, invading her space. "You're a girl who served pasta. Now you live in a palace. You think you earned this? You think he loves you? Men like Alessandro don't love, little girl. They own. And right now, you're a very, very expensive liability." "Get away from her, Franco." Sandro's voice came from the end of the hall. He was walking towards them, not with his usual calculated pace, but with a long, predatory stride. His tie was off, his collar unbuttoned. He looked exhausted and lethal. Franco paled. "Alessandro, I was just explaining the situation to the girl." "She's not a girl," Sandro said, stopping right in front of them, placing himself between Franco and Elena. "And her name is Elena. And she," he said, turning to Franco, his voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a shout, "is more important to me than this entire cursed city. More important than the docks. More important than you, cousin." Franco's jaw dropped. In this world, this was a declaration, a shift in power. "You're a fool," Franco hissed. "You're choosing her over the family. The old men will have your head." "The old men are coming to dinner tonight," Sandro said, his voice calm. "And so are the Vitales. And so are you." He looked at Elena. "And so are you." "What?" Elena and Franco said at the same time. "Sandro." "No," Elena whispered, grabbing his arm. "This is insane. These people, they'll kill me." "No one," Sandro said, covering her hand with his, "is going to touch you. This ends tonight. They wanted to send a message by burning a restaurant. Fine, I'm going to send a message by hosting a dinner." He turned to Franco. "Get out, and tell the Vitales, 8 p.m. sharp." Franco stared, his face a mask of disbelief and rage, and then he was gone. "Sandro, what are you doing?" Elena cried, her terror making her bold. "You can't bring them here. Not with Bella." "Bella is with Marcus at a secure location upstate. She's safe," he said. He looked at Elena, his eyes tired but resolute. "Franco was right about one thing. This is about you. And the only way to protect you is to show them you're not a weakness. You're my strength. I don't understand. You don't have to." He smiled, a genuine, albeit tired, smile. "Just go get dressed. Wear the red one." The red one was a stunning, floor-length crimson gown that had been in her closet for weeks, one she had never dared to touch, At 8 p.m., the penthouse was transformed. The large, cold living room was set for a formal dinner. Sandro stood at the head of the table, looking like a king, dressed in a flawless black suit. The guests arrived. Franco looking sick. 2 older, stern men in expensive suits, the old men from the other families, and 2 men she didn't recognize, who swaggered in with an air of arrogant victory. The Vitale brothers. They all stared when Elena walked in, wearing the red dress, her hair swept up. "What is this?" The older Vitale brother, Enzo, sneered. "Dinner and a show?" "This," Sandro said, his voice resonating with power, "is Elena Rossi." He walked to her, took her hand, and led her to the chair at his right hand. The Queen's chair. "She's the reason we're here," Sandro continued, his gaze sweeping the table. "You, Enzo, thought she was my weakness. You thought you could send a message by burning down a building." He snapped his fingers. Marcus, who had appeared from nowhere, placed a laptop on the table. "You were wrong," Sandro said, pressing a key. The laptop screen lit up. It was a live feed of a man tied to a chair. He was bloody and terrified. It was Arthur Vance. Elena gasped. "Sandro, what?" "The firebombing. It wasn't the Vitales," Sandro said, his eyes locked on Enzo Vitale. "Was it, Enzo? You're not that smart. You're a bully. You're just loud." He turned his attention to the 2 old men. "This thing," he pointed to Vance on the screen, "was a petty tyrant at the restaurant where I met Elena. The serpent's tooth. He was terrified. He started talking. To anyone who would listen. He was sloppy." He looked at Franco. "He talked about me, about Elena, about Bella. He sold what little he knew for gambling money. He sold it to you, Franco." Franco shot to his feet, his chair scraping. "It's a lie." "Is it?" Sandro said, his voice lethally calm. "You were skimming from the docks. You knew I was on to you. You needed a distraction, a war. So you used this idiot to leak information to the Vitales. You gave them the idea to hit the Milano. You engineered this entire thing, cousin. All to cover your own tracks. All because you were stealing from me." The room was silent. The old men looked at Franco. Enzo Vitale looked at Franco. They all looked like wolves who had just found the weakest member of the pack. "Alessandro, cugino, please," Franco begged, his bravado gone. "You put my daughter in danger," Sandro whispered. "You put her in danger. For money." Sandro looked at the old men. "He's yours." He then looked at Enzo Vitale. "And as for you, you were stupid enough to follow his lead. You will repay me for the restaurant, and you will give me 10% of your shipping business, for the inconvenience." Enzo started to protest, but one look from the old men, and one look at the pure, cold rage in Sandro's eyes, and he sat back down. He nodded. "And Franco," Sandro said. Franco was sobbing. "Please, he's family," one of the old men said, a warning. "He was," Sandro replied. He looked at Marcus. "Take him to the Serpent's Tooth. He can take Mr. Vance's old job, permanently." It was the ultimate humiliation. Not death, but something worse. Exile. He was no longer Falcone. He was nothing. Marcus dragged the weeping Franco out of the room. Sandro Falcone turned back to his guests. "Now," he said, smoothing his suit, "I believe we were having dinner." He raised his glass to Elena, his eyes filled with a dark, possessive, and undeniable love. "To the future." Mrs. Falcone. Everyone at the table, stunned, raised their glasses. Elena, her hand shaking, raised hers too. The dinner was the most tense, terrifying, and shortest meal of Elena's life. The old men and the Vitale brothers ate in a state of stunned silence. their power stripped away by Sandro's cold, strategic brilliance. He hadn't just won the war, he'd proven there was never a war to begin with, only a rat in his own house. As soon as the meal was over, they scattered, leaving Sandro and Elena alone in the massive, silent room, the plates of rich, untouched food sitting like monuments to a battle won. Elena was shaking. "Mrs. Falcone," she whispered, her voice trembling. Sandro walked to her, his face no longer the cold mask of the capo, but the tired, vulnerable face of the man she had seen with Bella. He took both of her hands in his. They were ice cold. "It was a statement," he said, his voice soft. "A political move, to show them, to show everyone, that you are not a weakness. You are my partner. You are the other half of my power. To touch you is to declare war on me, a war they now know they cannot win." "But you didn't ask me," she said, a small rebellious spark lighting in her. He had the grace to look, if not ashamed, at least chagrined. "No, I didn't." He brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles. "And for that I am sorry. It was the only way, Elena. The only way to end it. To make you safe. To make us safe." He looked into her eyes. But it was not a lie. "Sandro, I love you, Elena Rossi," he said, his voice raw with an honesty that stripped her bare. "I think I've loved you since you told that pathetic excuse for a man to back off from my daughter. You have a fire in you, a courage I've never seen. You're the only person in the world who isn't afraid of me." "I am terrified of you," she said, laughing through the tears that were suddenly streaming down her face. "No," he said, wiping a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "You're terrified of my world, but you are not afraid of me. And that makes all the difference." He leaned in, and this time there was no phone to interrupt, no cousin to betray them. He kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a kiss of desperation, of possession, of relief, of 1,000 unspoken things. It was the kiss of a man who had lived in darkness and had just found his only light. And Eleanor, to her own surprise, kissed him back, pouring all her fear, her gratitude, her anger, and her own dawning, terrifying love into it. When they broke apart, they were both breathless. "So," she said, her voice shaky. "What happens now?" "Now," he said, pulling her close, his arms wrapping around her waist. "We bring our daughter home. We get your sister settled. And you and I, we build a life. A real one." "In this world?" she asked, gesturing around the penthouse, the fortress. "This world is not my choice. It's my inheritance," Sandro said, his voice hard. "But you are my choice. Bella is my choice. From now on, the family, the business, it serves us, not the other way around." He smiled, and for the first time, it was a real, unguarded, happy smile. "Besides, I've just proven to the entire city that my fiancé is smarter and braver than all of my enemies combined. They'll be too afraid to even look at you sideways." Elena laughed, a real, genuine laugh. "So I'm the new Mafia boss?" "You're the boss's boss," he whispered, kissing her again. "You're the Falcon." The next day, Bella returned, her face lighting up when she saw Elena and Sandro standing together, holding hands. Clara was released from the clinic, her illness in remission, and was moved into a beautiful, sunlit apartment that Sandro had acquired for her. The Cafe Milano was rebuilt, but it was no longer the plastic and peeling gold relic of before. Sandro had it remodeled, and he put the deed in Eleanor's name. "A woman should always have her own place," he'd said, with a wink. And as for Arthur Vance, he was, as promised, left to rot. Elena, in a moment of strength she didn't know she had, went to the serpent's tooth. She stood before the broken, terrified man who was scrubbing a filthy floor. He looked up at her, his eyes wide with terror. "Ms. Rossi, please, I'm sorry." Elena looked at him, not with pity, but not with hate either. She just looked at him. "You were wrong," she said, echoing Sandro's words from that first day. "And I was right." She turned and walked out, not looking back, leaving the darkness behind and walking into the bright, dangerous, and impossibly beautiful future that was waiting for her. She was no longer a waitress. She was Elena Rossi Falcone, and she was just getting started. And so, Elena's single act of courage didn't just save a little girl. It toppled a corrupt system and brought a Mafia king to his knees, in the best way possible. She proved that true strength isn't about power or money, but about having the integrity to do what's right, even when it costs you everything. She walked into that restaurant as a waitress and walked out as a queen.